This is real life, and we all have our moments. It's hard. It's hard to be a human on this planet right now, and there are many people who are kind of burying their head in the sand and just going for the zombie thing because it's easier. And one thing that I will say that is my big message right now is the majority of the people on the planet want to live in a generous way. If you can become in any way an inspiration to another human being, that's a victory. Good morning. Welcome to Reality Riffing. I'm very excited about the show today. I have a great leader and trailblazer in the movement of spirituality and meditation here with me, Levine. And I'm just really excited to talk to you in many ways because I feel like you have been at the forefront of a spiritual community that really has been so modern and so deep and so community-minded with, at the same time, a place where so many can find, I'll use the word refuge. And so I am very honored to have you on the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Yeah, very happy to join you this morning.
Yeah, thank you. And we were just talking about kind of how many years have you been, when did you kind of start your own spiritual pursuit? Like how many years ago? Besides this, however many lifetimes, but in this particular one.
1988, so 29 years ago.
Yeah. So, I like to have conversations with people who have, this kind of depth of practice and this depth of experience. And in 1988, everybody was doing cocaine in America and not meditating. I mean, now, meditation is a kind of, this age has brought meditation into a household kind of conversation, which is exactly what this age is about. But I'd love to just talk about your roots and kind of how you found your spiritual kind of moment.
Well, I'm one of the few white Western, North Americans who grew up with the Dharma, who grew up with my father's a meditation teacher. I was around Jack Kornfield and Ram Dass and all of these, pioneering Western spiritual teachers. My father was there in '74 at the Naropa Trungpa thing. My dad wrote, probably the first mindfulness book, Gradual Awakening, Stephen Levine's Gradual Awakening book, which was kind of before any of the other people were really publishing mindfulness books.
Yeah.
And so I grew up around what, in Buddhism we call the Dharma.
Yeah.
And of course this term Dharma means different things in different traditions.
Right.
And so I was born into it, but totally rejected it because of my own suffering and trauma. And, for me, I heard punk rock when I was 10 years old, and I was like, no, this is spiritual.
Church.
This is church. This is my God.
Yeah.
This is music that speaks to the frustration, the dissatisfaction, the suffering that I experience internally, and that's a voice of it.
Yeah.
That I didn't understand how spiritual practice could address it.
Right.
Sitting in meditation didn't make sense to me as a kid.
Right.
Doing the pujas, doing the rituals didn't make sense to me. So my own path, which became drug addiction and crime and violence and, brought me to a place by the time I was 17, 3 felony arrests, looking at spending the rest of my life in and out of institutions and addiction, and which brought me to the willingness to say, I'll try anything. And my beloved father who said, well, meditation, try mindfulness, breathing in, pay attention to your breath, ignore your mind, come into your body, come into your heart, come into the here and now. Which even then it's like, well, this doesn't make sense. I need real help. Get me a lawyer. Get me out of this jail cell that I'm in. But as I started to meditate, I was like, oh, this actually works. I didn't know I didn't have to obey my mind. My mind has been giving me terrible advice, and I've been dutifully obeying my confused mind. And when that intervention of mindfulness, which was, oh, you don't have to pay attention. You don't have to obey. You can change your relationship to the internal and the external experience. And so I started meditating at 17 years old in 1988, doing Buddhist mindfulness. And I was speaking to one of your assistants on the way in about how do we land on our paths?
Yeah.
And so for me, also addiction recovery, the 12 steps were saying you have to find a higher power. There's a spiritual solution to this addiction. And I was like, okay-ish, but I don't believe in God, and I don't know, this sounds very Christian. This is very Christian.
Right.
How am I going to find my way here? So I spent some years early on, and then my father had the gurus, and so there was the Hindu devotional bhakti influence. And so I was like, okay, let me meet some gurus. I like the idea of a guru blessing me and taking away my suffering.
I know, it's so, what a relief.
What a relief that would be. And, so I spent some time, in that kind of and then in the punk scene, a bunch of the punks had became Krishna devotees.
Right.
And so then I was like, okay, I'm going to do spiritual practice. And then, Youth of Today is now Shelter and 108 and all of these like Hindu hardcore bands.
Right.
So that was a support. And I had straight edge punk, which was the drug free.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I'm no longer a drug addict punk rocker. I'm a drug free punk rocker.
Right.
I have straight edge. I have the Krishna. But eventually, and doing the mindfulness, I started doing retreats, going to Jack Kornfield retreats. I met some Buddhist monks. And I studied, and I went to India and just kind of looked at, are we all talking about the same thing?
Right.
In different ways? What's theistic, non-theistic, mystical, psychological? I just landed in, Buddhism, early Buddhism makes the most sense to me.
Yeah.
The kind of, what did the Buddha teach? Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Path. Oh, this is so practical. Normalizing suffering.
Yeah.
Showing clearly how suffering is self-created based on our reaction, not what's happening, but how do we respond to what's happening. There's an end to suffering possible in that kind of carrot, the hope.
Yeah.
This eightfold path. So it's just felt so, for me, for my Western mind, my male mind, whatever it was, it just felt like, I like this. It's very rational.
Yeah.
It's not too mystical for me.
Right.
And that just fit really well for me.
Cool.
And so I just committed and kept going, even though meditation doesn't work that well. And what I mean by that is it's not a quick fix.
No, it's
not like I started
Adderall.
meditating and now I'm not suffering. I was like, I started meditating and so much of what I was being taught was turn towards your suffering. And I was like, that's the last thing that I want to do. I've been running from my pain my whole life.
Yeah.
And now I come into this practice that says the only way to heal it is by feeling it.
Yeah.
And turning towards it and being in it. And so that was, counter instinctual, but it's also one of the reasons why I ended up landing in and loving Buddhism so much, because the Buddha himself said, this is a path that goes against the stream. This is rebellion.
Right.
That the norm for human beings is unhappiness.
Yeah.
True happiness is a radical, revolutionary action.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, cool, I want to be a revolutionary.
Yeah.
I've always wanted to be a revolutionary.
Yeah.
And then finding a path that says that's exactly what we're doing here, from the inside out, not just critiquing the political, social ignorance that we live in,
Right.
but critiquing the internal greed, hatred, attachment, self-centeredness that we live in.
Right. One of my favorite stories about Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche is he's in Boston, and somebody, I think it was in Boston, or maybe I'm co-opting two of my favorite stories, but somebody asked him in the crowd, like, Rinpoche, what do we do about the aggression that's happening in the world right now? I'm just like, my practice has made me so much more sensitive, and there's just so much aggression and violence, and he, as he was known to do, his little, like, take off the paper off of his water and drink the way, before he answers the question, and he just kind of leaned into the microphone and said, I want to talk about the aggression that's in this room right now. And it was, one of those moments of exactly that.
Yeah.
That it's that's the that's the kind of cutting through the self-deception of, especially for those. I mean, I grew up in My brother's a Hare Krishna. I only made out with straight edge guys, like exclusively. That was like a prereq for the makeout. And I grew up, very much kind of entrenched in that scene. And also, what my experience was the sexism of that scene. But, super kind of East Coast punk rock scene that I grew up in. And
Massachusetts?
No, Maryland.
Maryland, okay.
In West Virginia, actually. The only Jew in West Virginia, through the consensus of 1999.
There's one Jewish family.
There is one Jewish family. And they have a Hare Krishna son. So one thing that I kind of also recognized very early was that all true kind of spiritual heavyweights, in my opinion, were the true rebels. They were the people who were actually questioning what's going on, and what's not just going on in society, or not what's going on externally, but what's going on here. And so I love to hear that story.
Yeah.
So I want to just talk about, because one of the things that I've found fascinating, and also that I'm really most proud of in terms of what we've been creating here, is community that kind of has its own identity, and I feel that that's something that you've done so beautifully, and kind of with, obviously I don't know, no one will know every step of the way, but my ex-husband has benefited very much from refuge recovery, and a lot of friends of mine, and so I just want to kind of touch on what was the seed of creating community, and how has that kind of taken its own shape, and what's your relationship with the kind of seeds and the spiritual communities that you've kind of created and been the father of in many ways, of that's now kind of gone out way beyond your persona.
Mm-hmm. It's hard for me to say because, I never I never made a plan. I never sat down and said, I'm going to create a punk rock Buddhist movement and a Buddhist recovery. I didn't plan any of it. It all just came out of my suffering and my recovery and my commitment to waking up. And part of that is to be of service.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was driven by my teachers. I became a meditation teacher in a time when, if you wanted to be a meditation teacher, you probably weren't going to ever be allowed to in our community.
Right.
And that it was a really sort of handpicked, the teacher saying, you know this stuff and are living it, and it's your turn to teach. And this sort of lineage empowerment.
Yes.
Where it was much different environment than now, when people are just saying, I'm a spiritual teacher and I have a certification in it and I took a training. And, it's a much different environment 20 years ago.
Yes.
And, my teachers just said, start teaching.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, I was going to actually go to medical school. Mm-hmm. And I was like, but because I wanted to be of service.
Right.
I was like, okay, I'll do that. And, growing up with it and seeing my dad do it, I was like, I didn't think that this is what was going to become of my life, but I'll do it. And as I started to do it, in the beginning, I said, I don't want to be the addiction guy.
Right.
I don't want to exclude people who aren't addicts from our community.
Right.
Not
that would exclude hardly anyone, but
that's true. Fair enough.
No one,
but who are aware they're addicts. And so in the beginning, I said, okay, I'm just going to make this available to everybody. And there was all the straight edge kids that weren't, recovering addicts, that were just we're committed to drug free. And there was all of the folks. So I wanted to be inclusive. And I did have a sense that my generation, I went and was the only tattooed young person in all of these retreats.
Right.
And I was like, how can I create a community? Do I have an opportunity where it'll be a bit more accessible to the next generation, and it's not just the baby boomer, hippie, kind of usual suspects in the spiritual scene in the 80s and 90s.
Right.
And so as I began to teach, more and more people from my generation, from our generation, said, this is interesting. And seeing it as rebellion rather than just peace and love, seeing it as an internal radical action,
Right.
both to end our own suffering and also with social and political edges to it, that we're going to create a positive change through ending our own suffering. And we're going to end suffering in the world, in some ways, at least progress in that direction.
Yeah.
And so it really has all, for me, unfolded quite organically. And in a lot of ways, I've just followed the model of my teachers, where, they kind of rejected some of the hierarchical structures of Buddhism, where it was like the root guru, the Sayadaw or Ajahn is in charge forever. And so like Jack Kornfield, when he created IMS and Spirit Rock meditation centers, he said, let's do a teacher's council, this very Western way of doing it. Let's do a democratic council of teachers rather than one person being the guru kind of in charge.
Right.
Let's do this in a way. Let's make sure that there's women involved. Let's break out of this patriarchal system. They didn't do a very good job at any sort of racial diversity. So it ended up being all of these, mostly Jewish white folks.
Right, from Marin.
From Marin. And it's like I came in, like I was their diversity, the punk rocker guy, and there was like they forgot for a long time.
Yeah.
It wasn't on the radar to say like, oh, this is not accessible to racially diverse people.
Right.
And so then there's been a lot of movement. So a lot of what I did was like, okay, that's how Jack did it. He's my teacher. I want to do something like he has done, and of course with my own angle on it.
Right.
And so it's just like against the stream, sort of unfolded from there. And so much of it, I feel like, has come from the community.
Yeah.
I didn't like open a meditation center and then say like, hey, who wants to come in? Like we already had a community of thousands of people, and they came to me and said, we should have our own meditation center rather than renting these other rooms.
Right.
Because there's 200 people in the room.
Right.
We should be able to have our own place.
Right.
And so it really came from the community against the stream. Because I had already been in San Francisco and New York and Los Angeles. And then it was here 10 years ago that somebody said, here's a little bit of money, sign a lease, let's see if we can have our own community space.
Right.
And we said, oh, that works here. Let's do a second one here. Let's do San Francisco, Nashville, Boston, New York. And it just sort of grew in that way from the community wanting it, not from someone like me saying, like, I've got a business model to kind of, sell spirituality. It was really the community saying, we want this as a home.
And how many Dharma centers do you guys have now?
We have, 4. Really, 4 with our own brick and mortar.
Okay.
Where 2 in Los Angeles, 1 in San Francisco, Nashville. Boston doesn't have their own place. They sort of share a space. Yeah. New York rents different spaces. There's affiliated groups in Portland and Seattle. There's Dharma Punks. There's this sort of 3-tiered thing that I've created.
Yeah.
Dharma Punks is like peer-led groups without empowered teachers.
Okay.
Peer-led.
Yeah.
Against the Stream is empowered, trained teachers.
Right.
And so those are the New York, Boston, Nashville, San Francisco, LA groups. And then Refuge Recovery, which we, also created itself through my community. And, I wrote the book and everything, but it was really the community that said, we want this.
Yeah.
We have a treatment center here in Los Angeles, which is a professional, for addicts to come use Buddhism for recovery.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
On the east side. So there's a treatment center that I started 3.5 years ago.
Wow.
But then there's over 400 refuge recovery meetings all over the country, all over the world now.
Yeah.
And that's peer-led. And, so that's not a teacher. That's addicts getting together, using the Buddhist philosophy to treat addiction.
Right.
In meetings and in peer support.
Wow.
And it's, so I feel like I'm happy that it all exists, but I don't really feel like I created any of it. I feel like it sort of all created itself through my showing up and saying, this is what I'm doing. Anybody else want to do it? Okay, let's all do it together.
And I think, I mean, this is a very important aspect, I feel like, in the current kind of wellness space and what's happening in the wellness industry. I feel like this is very important, and it's something I talk about all the time, which is it's in the only thing that we can give people is basically our own experience and our own practice. And therefore, when that starts to amplify and your own kind of curiosity and your own kind of discovery of whatever that is and the mystery of who you are becomes so kind of magnetic, because it's magnetic to kind of be around someone who is on a quest. It's the hero's journey. It's just it's magnetic, and that's actually the way that movements are built, or in my opinion, any type of business, even if it's a not-for-profit or a for-profit or whatever service model. The thing is, because I think, one thing that is beautiful about what's happening on the planet is that, there's still obviously like heinous corporate greed, but then these younger generations are definitely starting to create models of business with the kind of GoFundMe and the whole kind of I can't think of the other one, but the profit sharing and the raising money that way, that is becoming a really different model. And
Kickstarter
and all that stuff. And so I do, but the crux of the magnetism, like if you're, there's no way to really kind of break down what it means to, or how you create, what charisma is, or magnetism. And obviously some of it is, in my opinion, incarnational. But the one of the functions of, if somebody wants to become a leader or create something, is that their magnetic quest is drawing people who are demanding that they show up, or that things get created, or that, that really is the difference between what I think a lot of the, some people are kind of up to. And
yes. Yeah. I mean, I'm fairly critical.
Yes.
I have a fairly kind of judgmental mind around, who's in the leadership space.
Yes.
and how much integrity they have.
Yes.
And how much practice they have.
Yes.
And all of that. But I've been so amazed because there's a part of me that wants to think like, oh, if people have lots of students, they must be good teachers, like because of that magnetism and stuff.
Right.
But what I've seen over and over is that actually some people are just really good at marketing. And there's people that are just like really good at marketing, and that kind of sell themselves and then show up and play the role.
Yes.
And there's a lack of discernment.
Yes.
And people are so hungry and listening to the words and not watching the actions and the footsteps.
Yes.
So
I feel that is changing with these younger generations.
Yeah, maybe.
Because what kind of Gen X will, because of the density, it just that is part of us, evolving. What they will believe is not what the millennials will believe. And then this Gen Z, man, they can see a bullshitter, 50 miles away. These kids are so laser beam, in my opinion. And that's why they're being like drugged on a mass level and, all this kind of thing, because they are so crystalline. So I think the era of the kind of spiritual or whatever charlatanism, I think it's fading really quickly, because look at what's like think about the people, we won't name any names. Think about the people who are in that category for
names.
you. I would love to. Let's name names.
Make a list.
But so think about those people. I mean, I watch this very closely because I hear you. I see. I know what you're talking about, and yet what I feel is happening almost on a mass level, and I'm not saying it's completely. There's no, obviously, we're working in all sorts of shades. Is that the people who've had that kind of marketing or internet marketing, or they, who they call themselves a spiritual teacher, which always makes me go, unless it's like a heavyweight who they wouldn't call themselves a spiritual teacher anyways. I mean, Yogi Bhajan, maybe he did, but hardly ever. I mean, it was definitely not on his Instagram account. But so those people, the thing is rapidly losing what, whatever the marketing did,
Right.
that, because the internet is such and social media, I mean, this is like the Sorcerer's Stone. I find it very fascinating because it really is, it's truly like the punk rock of the punk rock. I mean, this is like, you can Jello Biafra, you can be the media now. And I think that there's a self-selecting process that is happening. I'm watching it, where people even 2 years, 18 months ago, who were, had like some book out or drawing some big crowd and whatever, the kind of lack of practice or depth is showing up like more and more as the times are getting heavier. And then you see people who have the longevity and have been just doing what they do, and I feel like those people, it all shakes down, and I think it's happening right now. I really do. Maybe I'm wrong, but
no, I mean, I hope you're right, and I also feel like finally there's some focus on ethics.
Yeah.
And finally, there's some focus on all of these teachers who've been harming their students and misusing their sexuality.
Yes.
And because it's been happening, it's always been happening.
It has been.
And the men have been skating.
Yeah.
And so it's so good what's happening now, where it will hopefully remove the power from some of the folks who are unethical with it. I hope that. I really like what's happening.
I like what's happening too. I mean, I think that in it is the reactiveness is also part of the pendulum swinging, and so this is it's part of the shakedown. And as I said to you before we started, LA's on fire this morning. So we wanted, I just was like, cue fire and brimstone, Noah's going to be on the show this morning. Let's just burn the house down. But we're in apocalyptic fucking times right now. And I think that I've been saying this, that if this was a movie that we were watching, you probably wouldn't believe it. I mean, the plot line has gotten so twisted. And so, I mean, this is, we're in the future. I just yesterday woke up to like, good morning, Monday. And it was like, Google has created an AI child that's better than your child will ever be. I mean, we're in the future. It is Transformers, 3 or whatever the last one was. I mean, this is like Zombieland versus AI. And then there are those who, my teacher Yogi Bhajan said that basically we're called human beings because we have a choice to be human. It's an active choice. And then there's, the critical mass of those who are making that active choice. And I think it's very fascinating. I think it's better than the Star Wars mythology. I mean, this is like, you couldn't write this. Yeah. It's really powerful. And I'm just wondering how these times are affecting your own personal practice, and if you have any, like, affecting your communities, and what is, is there anything that you feel that has to even shift in your own personal kind of practice to be able to be the leader that you, whether you want to be or not, you have been chosen to be?
Yeah. Well, two things. One is that I always have a sense that, like, last night I gave my Dharma talk on living in samsara.
Yeah.
And that this realm, from a Buddhist perspective, is just a realm of suffering and ignorance. This is a realm fueled by greed, fueled by hatred, fueled by delusion. And I think also because of my traumatic childhood and the suffering that brought me to practice, I tend to look at the world with a kind of like, oh yeah, big surprise, more corruption, more ignorance, more this world is on fire. I mean, like you're saying, like LA's on fire. This was the second Dharma talk the Buddha ever gave to the fire worshippers, where he said, everything is burning with greed, with hatred, with delusion. He's saying this 2,600 years ago in an Indian culture where there's wandering spiritual people everywhere, and spirituality is really at the forefront. But he looks at his generation and says, there is so much greed, there is so much delusion. People are not going to wake up because they're so self-centered.
Right.
They're so confused.
That was 2,600 years ago.
2,600 years ago. And you can read some of the descriptions about it, and you'd be like, wow, like he thought that it was like the end times then.
Right.
And we always feel like it's the end times. Like, is it getting worse, or is it just, this is what human beings create dysfunctional cultures.
Right.
And then create delusional religions to justify the dysfunctional cultures.
Right. And the politic that is then, running the religion.
So it feels like, everything's kind of getting faster with technology in some ways. But it's also, to me, it feels like, oh no, it's just the way it's always been. Yeah. Confused people creating suffering.
Right.
So I don't feel like there's a big shift in me. I mean, one of the shifts personally for me and for my community is really looking at the white privilege.
Yes.
As really looking at the racist culture that we live in.
Yep. And
how white folks like myself have the privilege of not seeing ourselves as racial beings.
Right.
And, having that, the supremacist culture that we live in and the privilege. And so we're really looking at that and not just giving lip service to, like, we want a diverse community.
Yes.
But really undoing white, liberal, internalized racism and superiority and prejudice. And so that's one of the, kind of coming out of maybe Black Lives Matter, and that it has had a big effect on me and on our community to really say, what's the internal understanding that has to happen here? I mean, I sort of woke up to, I've sort of denied my race. I've sort of pretended like I was outside of the white, male, patriarchal, because I'm a punk rocker. I'm covered in tattoos, and I'm not part of them. And having to kind of like land in, I'm fucking part of them. Yeah. That's actually this incarnation. Yeah. I'm a straight white guy. Yeah. And I have that conditioning, and I have all of that privilege. Yeah. And
of a certain generation.
Of a certain generation.
Yeah. Which is, it is real. I say this to my boyfriend, but he doesn't really like to hear about this particular, because it's, it's entrenched in a very heavy way in certain, I think, generations. And
absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, that's a piece that's definitely coming in the Buddhist community and in our Against the Stream community, but I think in the broader Western Buddhist, mostly white European descent kind of Buddhists who are saying like, okay, wait, we want diversity, but we don't even know that we're white.
Right.
We don't even know that. We're in denial of that. Right. And we're in denial of the systematic racist oppression that's happening, and it's them rather than it's, we're all part of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a huge kind of unwinding, and I think it's going to take, things uncoil very quickly, in my opinion, when you're pushing up against kind of the rub of evolution, and then at the same time the like shakedown of what actually has to happen to systemically, awaken and undo these, supremacy, the supremacy culture. I was making a joke that I thought this was the best meme I've seen on social media in a while, which was, maybe I manifested it, maybe it's white privilege.
Yeah, no, I saw that too. I thought that was so brilliant.
It's so hilarious, because it's very much pointing to what is not only happening in the just world at large, but also in spiritual community and in, very much the way the spiritual communities I grew up in were. The Krishna community did have, obviously, East Indian people. Yeah. That was, and also actually in our community, there were, in DC, there was a lot of Black people as well. So there was a little bit more diversity than you'd see, like, you're going to see in my class this morning in Venice, California. And it's really, it's not because other aspects of the socioeconomics and race and all sorts of sexual identity, it's not because those people are not in some way interested in the universal pulse that they might call Jesus or God or whatever else you can name. So you can't say that it's because there's a disinterest in some sort of, finding something bigger than just the, work, slave, fuck, sleep society. So it's not that.
No,
so then what is it? What is it? And I think we've been asking ourselves this question. This is why we just opened a Dharma center in South LA. And it has all sorts of challenges, and it's very much like, okay, so like here we go, we're gonna like go to South LA and open a Dharma center, and and make it available, and there's just it's even the construct of that is questionable, and so we're really going through all of what that looks like and what that means, and yet we feel that we still need to create a space that is that people can inhabit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a big conversation.
Yeah, some of it is location. Some of it is.
I think a lot of it is.
If you open a studio in a predominantly white neighborhood and wonder why there's no diversity, that's certainly part of it.
I mean, Venice wasn't predominantly white not too long ago, but
true.
I mean,
I don't. Yeah, that's true.
But absolutely, I mean, that was kind of our presupposition of like, let's take this somewhere where it's convenient. But even that is wrong. It's not that it's wrong like moralistically, but it has its own set of challenges, and we're prototyping it because we would like to do it in a lot of inner cities. But it's definitely this is a conversation that's unfolding in our community, as uncomfortable as it is for many people.
And I feel like so much of it is also who's teaching, who's in the front of the room, and are you mirrored by the teacher? And I feel like that's one of the reasons why my community became so large, and with people covered in tattoo and from punk rock and backgrounds like mine, because they're like, oh, that guy's like me and he can do it.
Yep.
And I think it's also often why it's like, oh, there's your class is full of white women because that's who you look like. And so often people are looking for that. And so one of the pieces is, if you want a diverse community, you have to have some diversity in the teaching staff.
Yes.
I had a very famous Tibetan Lama come to me and say, I really want, like, you have all of these young people, and I really want to see that in my community. How do I get more youth in my teachings? And I said, well, first of all, empower some of the youth in your community to actually teach. And I happen to know this Lama's students, many of them who've been practicing with him, who are my age, our age, and have been practicing with him for 20 years and could be great teachers. But he was like, that's not the advice I'm looking for, because he's never going to empower young white, Americans to teach on the Lama level, because it's a hierarchical system where only the Tibetans are really allowed to teach it.
Right.
And it's just like, well, that's why, you're not going to have, because you're not allowing the teachers to mirror, and you're holding the power.
Right.
Right. And it's, and you have to share the power.
Yeah. This is a big conversation that I like to have with people who have some sort of
just riffing on reality.
Yeah,
we're just riffing on reality.
But what is your relationship to the teacher-student? Your own teacher and teachers, and because you've spoken about one of your teachers, I'm assuming maybe you have more than Jack, but. What is your relationship to that? Because I have really strong opinions about the teacher-student relationship. I come from a lineage, and I believe that to use Tibetan terms or whatever, the Abhishenka, the empowerment of the teacher, is what has gotten me everything, and my devotion to my teacher and the lineage. And people don't understand that in the West, but I'm just curious because I know that you certainly have secularized, but what is your personal relationship to the lineage, as it were?
I think that one of the main reasons I landed in Buddhism was because there's a core sense that you actually don't need a teacher, that it's not a teacher-student kind of thing, that the Dharma is here for the individual to embody, and that what you need is the teachings. Like the Buddha's final dying words were, seek no external refuge.
Right.
Take the Dharma and embody it in you. Now, of course, we need teachers to give us the instructions and to hold us accountable and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
But much different than a Sikh or a Hindu teacher-student relationship, or even the Tibetan teacher-student relationship.
Yes.
The Buddha called teachers kalyanamitta, which meant a spiritual friendship.
Yes.
And so I feel like part of my anti-authority attitude is I don't like being told what to do.
Yeah.
And I have such a kind of hypersensitivity to any kind of lack of integrity, or So I'm very critical of teachers in general, and feel that the teacher's job is to actually, from my perspective, the teacher's job is to make themselves not needed.
Agreed 100%.
To empower the student and say, this is in you, it's your work. If I can support you in that, great. As a friend on the path, great. But I'm not going to give you any blessings. I'm not going to give you I can't do anything about your karma other than help you work with your karma yourself.
Yes.
So I have a very mixed relationship with my teachers. Partially, I'm very irreverent.
Yes.
And I will talk shit about my teachers. I do not hold reverence about them. And I'm also very reverent and devotional sometimes when I'm with them because there's so much gratitude.
Yeah.
Respect for teachers for me has to be completely earned. I don't respect a Tibetan Lama because they're a Lama.
Yes.
If I have an experience with them,
right.
then if it's an earned,
Yes.
that teacher-student relationship, I have a ton of respect and appreciation, devotion towards Jack Kornfield because he's earned it because he's helped me for 30 years.
Yes.
And it's a relationship, but it's a real relationship where we have conflict and we argue. And I say, you know what? I think you're full of shit. And he says, no, I think you're full of shit.
Right.
And we go back and forth, about that because it's a real friendship.
Yeah.
And it's not I'm going to always defer to my teachers. I'm going to question my teachers. And so I also show up in that way of with my students, question me. Don't believe everything that I say. Question this and watch my actions. Yeah. Not what I'm saying all of the time, but how am I living? And so it's a very mixed relationship, and I'm probably a little bit of a hesitant teacher. I want to be of service. I don't want all of the projections that go along with the job, but I know it's part of the deal. Yeah. And I don't do it. Sometimes I do it really poorly, and I forget the power and the projection that's on me. And I treat somebody like a friend, and they're like, "That really hurt me." Because you're not actually my friend. You're my dad.
Right.
In my projection, and I forget that I'm dad.
Right.
I forget that I'm that I'm holding that role, and I'm just being irreverent. And they're like, "Oh my God!" You touched this, authority wound, and I do that sometimes, and I say oh, of course I did. Yeah. Oh, I fucked up. Of course, big surprise. Yeah. And I'm totally sorry, and I want to repair it, and take responsibility for it. Not oh, well, this was crazy wisdom teaching to you. I didn't do anything wrong. I have no responsibility. This was a teaching to you. I never do that. I'm always kind of what's my part?
Yeah, I mean,
was I unskillful? Probably it was.
And why don't you do that? I mean, because I would just say to you that the translation of what spiritual friend is a Western translation to what that word is. It's we don't even understand friendship, let alone what that meaning of friendship means, the depth and the complexity. Because a true friend in other cultures comes to your fucking door, and when you're off the beaten path, when you're doing something weird, like in Kenya, they'll show up and beat your face. They'll tell you, what the fuck, bro, you're fucked up and you need to get your shit together. That's friendship in other cultures. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I feel the way that I use it is that the relationship is that the teacher is as accountable to the student as the student is accountable to the teacher.
I think that's a great definition.
And that's what a friendship, we're both accountable to each other.
Yes.
And knowing that there is a projection and a hierarchy and a transference. And, I'm also a psychotherapist. I get that stuff.
Yes.
I'm trained.
Yes.
So I also see that. And I'm not always great at it.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, you'd have to ask my students to see what they think. But I don't have the kind of I don't hold the role in the way that maybe that has been important for you, and like you said, your relationship with your teachers has been very key.
Well, but this is what I mean. I'm talking about the Vajrayana danger. In my opinion, the teacher should be the most dangerous person that you have ever met. And that is the relationship that has given me everything. I'm not talking about some bhakti, I'm talking about the danger, the razor's edge.
What does that mean? Dangerous how?
What danger is that the relationship is so complex,
Yeah.
the relationship is so deep, so unidentified, so unconventional that you feel like you're about to like piss or shit your pants all the time when you're around the person, and sometimes not at all. You're totally
Right.
comfortable, but that it's a alchemical transmission, and I don't think that there's any understanding, and I don't understand it. I just know that it's what I want. It's what I want to have, those types of relationships in all of my relationships, not just like the relationship of the lineage, but certainly Yogi Bhajan came here and said, I'm here to create teachers, not students. And he was really, I take that very seriously. So he was very much in, but at the same time, just as in, the spiritual friend or having a human guide to help you to see the mirror
Right.
of your own whatever, the quagmire, is, I think, incredibly integral. And it's very complex. So I just love to talk. We could sit here for hours and talk about it.
No, yeah, it's complex, and maybe there are a lot of different systems, and for a lot of different personalities, and a lot of different. I feel skeptical of there's one right way.
Yes.
And some people need a very gentle nudge, and some people need to feel like they're in danger, and
totally.
So.
Yeah. I mean, and I think anybody who is I was just talking about this in our teacher training this weekend, anybody who's a true leader, or if you want to call them a teacher, I don't know, I think that's even a rough word, they are they have the capacity of their own system to respond and be able to all sorts of different complex scenarios of subtlety and energetics and demands and the projections and all the things that are part of the best, in my opinion, the best leaders, from Bill Clinton, whatever you think of him. Dude had this capacity, which is he knew how to treat different people in specific ways that were going to optimize the situation. So good politicians have it too. But
Sure.
there's a way you would never yell, a lot, old Yogi Bhajan students, I'll hear them say Yogi Bhajan never yelled at me. And then and that's kind of a pride moment for them. And then there'll be someone who's he called me an idiot every day of my life. And that's the same teacher, same guy.
Right.
That was how he is. So, I think it's a dynamic.
Well, one of the things that I run into, and I think we run into in our community, and I feel this often, I'm sitting here and I'm teaching to 150 people or whatever it is, and there's not one right. There's like you're saying, it's so individualized.
Yes.
And it's one of the things that the Buddha, why there's so many different teachings, and sometimes where his teachings are contradicting other teachings, is because for this community, he said, actually, you really need to learn how to concentrate and do jhana practice and do deep concentration practice. And in this other sutta, he says, concentration's not that necessary.
Right.
Just do mindfulness.
Right.
Mindfulness is the true path to awakening.
Right.
And then over here, he's saying, you guys just do loving kindness and compassion,
Yep.
And so it's then we have all of these different teachings for different people in different times.
Yeah.
And so when you're doing teachings to large groups, it's what's the right teaching for everybody? You give them all of the teachings and you let them find out what resonates with them, rather than this is the right way and here's the here's the systematic way to do it.
Right.
Level
Right.
1, level 2,
Right.
level
Right.
3.
Yeah.
Maybe for some that we don't do it that way. We just say okay, here's the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path. Here's the Brahma-Vihara heart practices. Here's the mindfulness practices. Here's the concentration techniques. Let's go on retreat. Let's develop this, and we'll each develop it differently.
Right.
And I don't get to have a one-on-one relationship with very many students, mostly just the ones that I'm training to be teachers.
Right.
And the ones that I'm training to be teachers, it's a 5-year process. And so we really develop, and usually they've been practicing with me for 5 years before I'll let them do a teacher training. Mm-hmm. And so there's already some relationship there. And then that really deepens some of my students in teacher training, at some point realized, they said, be careful. Don't tell Noah you won't do anything. Because as soon as you say, I won't dance, we're dancing. As soon as you say, I won't, give a lecture, if you're giving a lecture, so, because that's a big part of my training process is like no limitations. In order to truly be in the teacher role, you better be able to dance. You know, not just sit still and give a good lecture. And you better be able to push through whatever makes you uncomfortable. And you better be able to sit still and deal with your own sensations and emotions. But it's so much more than sitting still.
Yes, it is so much more. We could talk for a long time.
Yeah,
Thank you so
pleasure.
much.
Happy
it's so
to.
fun
Happy
to fun to talk with you. How do people find you, and is there anything that you're working on that like you wanna touch on or direct
No, I mean,
people
not so much. I mean,
towards?
really, my passion is the refuge recovery. What I'm doing with the treatment center, and people that are interested in that can find that information at refugerecoverycenters.com.
Amazing.
And then there's the meetings, which is refugerecovery.org, and there's hundreds of meetings, probably wherever the listeners are. There's probably meetings in their area. And so that's, for the peer-led meetings. And then there's Against the Stream, and there's all of the meditation centers that we have. It's welcome. Everyone's welcome, donation-based. And we do residential silent mindfulness retreats. What's the next? What do I got coming up? I'll be at Esalen in January for a week, and that's such a beautiful place.
So beautiful.
People listening to this, if want to come up to Esalen, and then lots of silent retreats on the schedule for next year, and all of that's on againstthestream.org.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.